What is the anatomy of a coincidence? Where is the precise line between a random alignment of events and a pattern whispering a hidden truth? We live our lives adrift in a sea of data of disconnected moments and unrelated phenomena, trusting that the chaos is just that chaos. We trust that the silent clockwork waltz of the cosmos has no bearing on the frantic, unpredictable pulse of human affairs. We have, for centuries, built our modern world on this fundamental separation, this comfortable certainty that the heavens above and the markets below move to the rhythms of entirely different drums. But what if just once that certainty were to fracture? What if two seemingly disparate events, one born of celestial mechanics billions of years in the making, and the other from the pinnacle of human ambition, were to synchronize with such unnerving precision that to ignore the connection felt like a bright failure of imagination, or worse, a failure of survival? This is the story of such a moment, a story that begins in the coldest, darkest, most ancient nursery of our solar system. Out there, unimaginably far from the warmth and light of our star, lies a ghostly realm known as the Oort cloud. It is less a place and more of a memory, a vast spherical halo of trillions of icy bodies, the forgotten debris left over from the birth of our sun and its planets 4.5 billion years ago. Here, in a silence so profound it is absolute, and a cold so deep that molecules barely tremble, these primordial relics drift in a state of suspended animation. They are time capsules, perfectly preserving the raw ingredients of our cosmic neighborhood in a cryogenic slumber. For eons, uncounted one such relic, a slumbering giant of ice and rock and dust designated 3I, Atlas, orbited in this profound darkness. Its journey was a patient looping path measured in millions of years, a ghost haunting the gravitational frontier of our solar system, utterly unknown to the fleeting civilizations that rose and fell on the distant third planet. Its existence was a statistical probability, a theoretical ghost in the machine of celestial mechanics, but nothing more. Then, sometime during the dawn of human history on Earth, something shifted. Perhaps it was the subtle gravitational nudge from a passing star, a phantom tide in the cosmic ocean. Or maybe it was a random jostle from a fellow traveler in the dark. Whatever the cause, the delicate equilibrium of its ancient orbit was broken. 3I, Atlas, was tipped over a gravitational precipice. Its long, slow dance transformed into an inexorable fall, a one-way journey inward toward the heat, toward the light, toward a brutal and spectacular encounter with the Sunday. For thousands of years it fell, a silent missile of ice and dust crossing the orbits of Neptune, Uranus, Saturn. It moved through the planetary neighborhood like a phantom, still too cold, too dark to be seen. But as it swept past the orbit of Jupiter, the sleeping giant began to stir. The faint, distant warmth of the sun, a star it had never truly known, began to touch its frozen surface. A strange and violent alchemy commenced. Ancient ices, solid for billions of years, began to sublimate, transforming directly from a solid into a gas. This wasn't a gentle melting, it was a volatile eruption. Jets of vapor and dust blasted from its nucleus, a process of cosmic outgassing that shrouded the dark, irregular body in a glowing, ethereal fog. This veil, this temporary atmosphere, is what we call a coma. Suddenly, the invisible ghost became a visible spectre. It was first spotted by our automated sky surveys as a faint, fuzzy smudge, one of thousands of such discoveries. But this one was different. Its trajectory was not the familiar looping path of a short-period comet. This was a tourist from the outer darkness, a long-period visitor on a hyperbolic trajectory, meaning that after its fiery handshake with the sun, it would be flung back out into the interstellar void, never to return. This was for humanity a once-in-a-civilization event, and as 3I, Atlas, plunged deeper into the inner solar system, its transformation accelerated into something breathtaking. The constant stream of charged particles from the sun, the solar wind, began to act upon its expanding coma like a celestial blowtorch. It sculpted the ethereal cloud, pushing it away from the sun and smearing it across the black canvas of space into a magnificent shimmering tail. In fact, it grew two tails. One, a brilliant bluish streamer of ionized gas, pointed directly away from the sun, a glowing testament to the star's invisible power. The other, a broader, more gracefully curved fan of dust, reflected the yellow-white sunlight, a trail of primordial breadcrumbs marking its orbital path. Night after night it grew brighter in our skies, its scale becoming terrifyingly apparent. The nucleus itself, the solid body, might only be a few dozen kilometers across a mere mountain of dirty ice. But its coma had swelled to a diameter greater than that of the planet Jupiter, and its tail stretched for hundreds of millions of kilometers, a translucent ribbon of light that could span the distance from the Earth to the Sunday. It was becoming a spectacle not seen in generations, a celestial brushstroke of impossible size, a beautiful, silent, and extraordinarily violent visitor. The destination of this epic journey is an event of exquisite brutality perihelion. Its closest approach to the Sunday, here at the climax of its long fall 3i, Atlas, will be subjected to the full unmitigated fury of our star. Temperatures will skyrocket, the outgassing will become a constant, furious explosion. The gravitational tides from the Sun will try to rip its very nucleus apart to shatter the icy mountain into a string of celestial pearls. Will it survive? Will it be torn asunder? Or will it round the Sun, scarred and diminished, to begin its long, lonely climb back into the darkness? This is the drama that has captivated astronomers and stargazers alike. Our most powerful telescopes, our most sophisticated probes, our collective human curiosity, all pointed outward, focused on this magnificent cosmic pageant, this raw display of the solar system's untamed power. We watch it, we measure it, we marvel at its beauty and its violence, secure in our role as detached observers of a drama billions of kilometers away. We were looking up completely enthralled, and that is why at first almost no one noticed the tremor beneath our feet. It began not as a crash or a panic, but as a whisper, a statistical anomaly in a river of noise. In the world of high finance, a world that moves at the speed of light across fiber optic cables, the smallest deviation from the norm can signal a seismic shift. The system, our global economic engine, has a rhythm, a digital heartbeat of buying and selling, of risk and reward. And in the months leading up to the perihelion of 3i, Atlas, a handful of obscure analysts, financial quants, and obsessive data miners began to detect a subtle arrhythmia in that beat. It was a quiet, almost imperceptible trend of liquidation, a silent exodus of capital from the highest echelons of the global elite. A repositioned portfolio here, a block of shares quietly sold there. At first it was dismissed as noise attributed to new tax laws, market corrections, or the idiosyncratic whims of the ultra-wealthy. These are, after all, individuals who operate on a scale we can barely comprehend, for whom selling $1 billion in stock is the equivalent of us cleaning out a wallet. But the whisper grew louder, the pattern became clearer, more defined, and vastly more troubling. This was not the random motion of a few dozen billionaires. This was coordinated, or at least unnervingly synchronized. It was a wave. A great silent outgoing tide of wealth pulling away from the shores of the global market. The names involved, when pieced together from regulatory filings, leaked documents and forensic data analysis, read like a roll call of the modern pantheon: the tech visionaries who had built our digital world from silicon and code, the industrial titans whose empires of steel and energy shaped the physical planet, the hedge fund oracles who saw the future in the subtle language of algorithms and market sentiment. The architects of our age, the very individuals who had demonstrated the most profound faith in the systems they helped create, were in unprecedented numbers, and with breathtaking speed converting their vast holdings, their shares, their equity, their stake in the future into the oldest, most tangible forms of security: physical gold, vast tracts of isolated land, hardened underground bunkers, and untraceable digital currencies. The sheer scale of it was staggering almost beyond belief. We are not talking about billions, we are talking about an amount of liquidated assets that when combined would rival the gross domestic product of a G7 nation. Trillions of dollars quietly and methodically extracted from the global circulatory system. It was a financial event with no historical precedent. Never before had so much wealth held by so few moved so quickly and so quietly out of the mainstream. The official explanations offered by their spokespeople were polished and plausible. They spoke of diversification of philanthropic endeavors, of estate planning, of navigating an era of increased volatility. Each explanation in isolation made perfect sense, but taken together as part of this vast, synchronized migration of capital, they felt like a flimsy curtain drawn across a gaping chasm of unspoken truth. It felt less like a strategic repositioning and more like a retreat, an orderly, meticulously planned evacuation. The people who supposedly knew the most, who had access to the best information, the most sophisticated predictive models, who had built their fortunes on seeing what others could not, were all as if responding to a silent alarm that only they could hear heading for the exits. And that is when the unthinkable question, the one that hovered at the edge of rationality, began to be asked. At first in jest on the fringe forums and conspiracy blogs of the internet. Then with more urgency by independent journalists and market Cassandras. And finally in hushed tones in the corridors of power and finance. The timing, the terrifying, impossible, ludicrous timing of it all. The acceleration of this great sell-off did not merely coincide with the appearance of Comet 3I, Atlas. It mirrored its journey. As the comet grew brighter, the volume of selling increased. As it crossed the orbit of Mars, the liquidation reached a fever pitch. The two phenomena, one of celestial grandeur and the other of terrestrial finance, were moving in lockstep. Two epic events, unfolding on stages of vastly different scales, one in the silent theatre of the cosmos and the other in the roaring coliseum of the global economy, were marching to the same beat. A coincidence? It had to be. To believe otherwise was to step across the line into a world of superstition and magical thinking, to abandon reason for portents and omens. And yet the human mind is a pattern-seeking machine. It is one of our greatest strengths, and perhaps one of our most profound weaknesses. For millennia long before we understood the science of orbital mechanics or the composition of cometary nuclei, we looked to the heavens for meaning. Comets in particular, these sudden ghostly apparitions in the predictable clockwork of the night sky, have always held a special power over our psyche. They were the harbingers of change, the celestial messengers that were said to precede the fall of kings, the outbreak of plague, the dawn of war. They were cosmic punctuation marks in the story of humanity, their fiery tails writing warnings across the heavens. We told ourselves we had outgrown such things. We had replaced astrology with astrophysics, superstition with science. We understood that 3I, Atlas, was merely a ball of ice and rock, obeying the fundamental laws of gravity and thermodynamics. It carried no message, no prophecy. It was simply a beautiful, mindless object on a collision course with the sun's immediate vicinity. But here at the precipice of its spectacular arrival, we are confronted with a grand and unnerving possibility. Are we witnessing the greatest coincidence in human history, a meaningless alignment of a celestial spectacle and a massive unrelated financial maneuver, or are we seeing the quiet, frantic preparations of the world's most powerful individuals for a future they have foreseen and we have not? Are we the public merely projecting our own anxieties about a volatile world onto the silent majesty of the comet, using it as a screen upon which to play out our fears? Or is it possible, just possible, that the ultra-rich, with their access to classified data, to private intelligence, to technologies and sciences hidden from public view, have found a concrete reason to fear this particular visitor? Have they discovered something about 3I, Atlas, its composition, its trajectory, its potential effects on our planet or our sun, that has compelled them to abandon the very system that made them wealthy? This is the enigma that lies at the heart of our investigation. We must peel back the layers of this profound mystery, separating fact from fear, science from speculation. We will journey with astronomers to the world's great observatories to understand what makes this comet unique and whether it poses any conceivable threat. We will dive deep into the shadow world of high finance with forensic accountants and market analysts to trace the flow of this unprecedented exodus of capital and uncover the strategies behind it. We will speak with psychologists and historians to explore the deep-seated human impulse to see disaster written in the stars. The stakes are almost too high to contemplate, for if this is all just a coincidence, it is a fascinating case study in mass psychology and market dynamics. But if it is not, If there is a genuine hidden connection between the celestial messenger and the actions of the global elite, then we are all standing at the edge of a history-altering revelation. The question we must now pursue, the question that hangs in the air with the same ghostly light as the comet itself, is this: what do they know? What is it that they see when they look up at 3i, Atlas, that the rest of us do not? Is it just a comet? Or is it a countdown? What if the great convulsions of human history, the moments that shatter empires and erase fortunes, are not born in parliaments or on battlefields? What if their true genesis lies not in the machinations of human ambition, but in the cold, silent arithmetic of the cosmos? We have been conditioned to see the universe as a backdrop, a magnificent but passive stage upon which our urgent dramas unfold. We chart the stars to navigate our oceans, to mark our seasons, but we have long since abandoned the idea that they might chart us, that their movements could hold a key to our own imminent future. It is a belief we relegated to the mists of antiquity, to the age of augurs and court astrologers, a charming but primitive superstition. And yet here we are in an age of quantum computing and genetic engineering, confronted by a whisper that has become a roar. A theory so outlandish it should have evaporated in the light of reason, but which instead has taken root in the most fertile soil imaginable: the deep, pervasive distrust of a world that feels increasingly volatile and unreadable. The theory connects two phenomena that could not be more disparate. On one hand, the disciplined, predictable journey of a celestial wanderer. On the other, the chaotic, seemingly irrational spasms of the global financial market. It suggests that a handful of the wealthiest individuals on Earth, the titans of industry and technology who shape our daily existence, are acting in concert, guided by a secret that has nothing to do with earnings reports or geopolitical tensions. It suggests they are looking up past their stock tickers and data streams to a single faint point of light moving inexorably across the void. They are looking at a comet, and they are selling everything. The story begins as so many cosmic stories do, in the quiet dark. It begins with a robotic eye, unblinking and tireless, sweeping the starfields from a mountaintop in Hawaii. The Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, or ATLAS, is our planetary sentry. Its purpose is a noble and anxious one: to find the celestial rocks that might one day find us. For years, its digital gaze sifted through the infinite flagging countless near-Earth objects, mapping the orbits of familiar neighbours. But on a late autumn evening, it registered something different. A faint smudge, barely distinguishable from the background noise of the cosmos, moving with a velocity and trajectory that defied easy explanation. This was no local vagrant, no chunk of rock from our own asteroid belt. The object's path was a hyperbola, a sweeping, open-ended arc that screamed of origins far beyond the gravitational grip of our sun. It was a tourist, a traveller from the interstellar deep. After meticulous confirmation by observatories around the globe, it was given a designation that to the uninitiated sounds like a catalogue number, but to astronomers was a proclamation of profound significance: 3i, Atlas. The I stood for interstellar. This was only the third such object ever detected in human history. The first, the bizarre cigar-shaped Oumuamua, tumbled past us in 2017, a fleeting enigma that left more questions than answers. The second 2i, Borisov, was more familiar, a comet that behaved much like our own. But 3i, Atlas, was different. It was larger, brighter, and its path was set to bring it on a spectacular, searing journey through the inner solar system. To understand the drama that was about to unfold, you first have to understand the celestial mechanic at its heart, perihelion. It is a word that sounds gentle, almost poetic, but it describes an event of unimaginable violence. For any object orbiting our sun, from a planet to a speck of dust, there is a point in its elliptical journey where it is closest to that star. That point is perihelion. For Earth, it is a mild, almost unnoticeable annual passage. But for a comet like 3i, Atlas, a pristine relic from the frozen darkness between the stars, perihelion is a trial by fire. Imagine a perfectly preserved snowball, billions of years old, composed of ancient water ice, frozen gases like methane and carbon dioxide, and speckled with primordial dust and rock. For eons it has drifted through the interstellar medium, where the temperature hovers just a few degrees above absolute zero. Its existence has been one of profound static cold. But now it is falling. It has been captured by the gravitational siren song of our sun, a star it was never meant to encounter. As it plunges inward, the serene environment it has always known begins to change. The gentle sunlight of the outer solar system becomes a relentless thermonuclear blowtorch. The surface of the comet, which has been dormant for longer than our own planet has existed, begins to awaken. The ancient ices do not melt. They sublimate, transforming directly from solid to gas. Jets of vapor burst from its frozen crust like geysers on a world of ice-venting material that has been locked away since before the formation of our own solar system. This process, this violent outgassing, creates the magnificent feature we call a coma, a vast, glowing atmosphere of gas and dust that can swell to be larger than the planet Jupiter. And the solar wind, a constant stream of charged particles flowing from the sun, pushes this material away, sculpting it into the iconic ethereal tails that can stretch for millions of kilometers across the sky. Perihelion is the climax of this brutal, beautiful transformation. It is the moment of maximum stress, maximum energy, the point where the comet is subjected to the most intense heat and gravitational tidal forces it will ever experience. It is a moment of potential catastrophe. Some comets, their structural integrity compromised by the ferocious outgassing, simply disintegrate, vanishing in a final brilliant puff of celestial dust. Others survive their surfaces forever scarred and are slingshotted back out into the void from whence they came. The perihelion of 3I, Atlas, was calculated with pinpoint precision. It was an appointment with destiny, a fixed point on a celestial timetable, and as it drew closer, it promised to be one of the most spectacular astronomical events of the century. And for a while, that is all it was, a subject of eager anticipation for astronomers and stargazers. The world's attention was as always on terrestrial matters, until the whispers began. They did not start in the hallowed halls of finance or in the glossy pages of business journals. They started where so many modern mythologies are born, in the anonymous, hyper-caffeinated corners of the internet. The genesis can be traced to a single post on a niche data analysis forum, a place populated by quantitative analysts, programmers, and hobbyists who find beauty in uncovering patterns within vast, chaotic datasets. The post was titled Anomalous Q3Q4, Executive Divestment Correlated with Inbound Hyperbolic Object. It was cryptic, dense, and almost certainly destined for obscurity. The author, writing under a pseudonym, presented two simple charts. The first plotted the trajectory of Comet 3I, Atlas, showing its distance from the Sun decreasing over time towards its perihelion. The second was an aggregation of public filings tracking the volume of stocks sold by a specific list of C-suite executives and majority shareholders from the world's top 50 tech and industrial corporations. Individually, each dataset told a clear story. The comet was getting closer, and a group of very wealthy people were, for their own publicly stated reasons, diversification, philanthropic commitments planned, capital ventures liquidating portions of their immense holdings. But when the anonymous analyst overlaid the two graphs, a chilling, almost perfect inverse correlation emerged. As the comet accelerated towards the Sun, the rate of insider selling accelerated in lockstep. At first, the post was met with skepticism and ridicule. Correlation, as any first-year statistics student knows, does not imply causation. It was a coincidence, a classic case of apophenia, the human brain's determined and often flawed tendency to see meaningful patterns in random noise. The forum's moderators nearly deleted it for being unscientific, yet the idea refused to die. It was too elegant, too tantalizing. It was reposted to other, more conspiracy-minded subforums and social media groups. There it found fertile ground. The original data was reanalyzed, expanded upon. More names were added to the list of sellers. More data points were plotted. The pattern held. People started digging not just into the financial data, but into the comet itself. What was 3I Atlas made of? What did we know about interstellar objects? Could it pose a threat that the public was not being told about? Mainstream science was unequivocal. The comet's orbit was well understood. It would pass millions of kilometers from Earth, posing no physical threat whatsoever. It was a scientific marvel, not a harbinger of doom. But in the ecosystem of the new rumor, these official pronouncements were seen not as reassurances, but as part of the cover-up. The narrative began to solidify. The billionaires, with their access to private intelligence, to secret scientific advisors, to data streams the public could never dream of, knew something. They knew the comet's perihelion was not just a light show. They knew it would trigger some kind of event, a massive solar flare, an electromagnetic pulse, a gravitational anomaly. The theories were wild and varied that would cripple our technologically dependent civilization and crater the global economy. Their massive sell-off wasn't just portfolio management. It was a coordinated exodus, a flight to the safety of hard assets like gold land and subterranean bunkers before the sky fell. The story was a perfect storm of modern anxieties. It tapped into the profound economic inequality of our time, the feeling that the ultra-wealthy play by a different set of rules. It leveraged the growing distrust in established institutions, from governments to the scientific establishment. And it wrapped it all in the epic cosmic grandeur of a visitor from another star system. What began as a quirky statistical observation on an obscure forum was now a full-blown global conspiracy theory, spreading through social media feeds and video streaming sites like wildfire. It had a name, a hashtag, a legion of believers, and a terrifyingly simple premise: the elite are quietly heading for the lifeboats, while the rest of us are being told to simply admire the beautiful iceberg dead ahead. This desperate search for meaning in the sky, this projection of our earthly fears onto the silent movements of celestial bodies, is not a new phenomenon. It is perhaps one of the oldest and most deeply ingrained impulses of the human psyche. For millennia before we understood the clockwork physics of the solar system, comets were not seen as icy bodies, but as divine messages, cosmic omens painted across the heavens. They were almost universally regarded as harbingers of disaster. The ancients called them disasters, from the Greek for bad star. The Roman historian Pliny the Elder wrote that a comet is a very terrible star, noting its appearance was often linked to political assassinations and war. The famous Bayeux Tapestry, which chronicles the Norman conquest of England in 1066, prominently features Halley's comet blazing in the sky. To the English, it was a terrifying omen of the doom that was to befall their king. To the invading William the Conqueror, it was a sign of divine approval for his cause. The same object in the sky was interpreted as both a curse and a blessing, its meaning shaped entirely by the hopes and fears of those looking up. This pattern repeats itself throughout history, a rhythmic counterpoint of scientific discovery and public superstition. In the 16th century, the great Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe made meticulous observations of a comet, proving through parallax that it was a celestial object far beyond Earth's atmosphere, not a meteorological event as Aristotle had taught. It was a monumental step forward in our understanding of the cosmos. Yet at the same time, his contemporaries were publishing pamphlets that linked the comet's appearance to outbreaks of plague, the birth of deformed animals, and the fall of kings. Even as science began to demystify these visitors, the human mind clung to the old, more dramatic interpretations. The Great Comet of 1681, of the brightest ever seen, terrified Europe, and was widely blamed for a subsequent deep freeze and famine. Isaac Newton, in a breathtaking display of intellectual power, used this very comet to test and prove his universal law of gravitation, forever transforming it from a divine omen into a predictable physical object. But you cannot use a mathematical formula to erase a primal fear. The superstition simply adapted. When Halley's comet returned in 1910, astronomers had analysed its tail with spectrographs and detected the faint signature of cyanogen, a toxic gas. The scientific reality was that the concentration was so infinitesimally thin that the Earth would pass through the tail with absolutely no effect. But the tabloid press seized on the news, running hysterical headlines about the entire planet being gassed. Panic ensued. People bought anti-comet pills made of sugar and quinine, sealed their windows and keyholes with paper, and in some cases sold all their belongings in anticipation of the end. The comet passed, the world did not end, and the panic subsided, but the psychological template remained. Even in our own lifetimes, the arrival of Comet Hale-Bopp in 1997, a magnificent spectacle that graced our skies for months, was not immune. While millions marveled at its beauty, a small but fervent cult tragically concluded it was a sign to shed their earthly bodies and ascend to a spacecraft hidden in the comet's tail. This is the deep historical context into which the 3I Atlas theory was born. It is a modern iteration of an ancient impulse. The specifics have changed. We no longer fear divine wrath or poisonous vapors, but rather economic collapse and technological disruption. The medium has changed. The message is no longer carried by pamphlets and town criers, but by encrypted messaging apps and viral videos. But the core psychological mechanism is identical. In times of profound uncertainty, when the systems that govern our lives feel too complex, too random, or too corrupt to trust, we look for an external locus of control. We look for a pattern, a script, a reason. The idea that a few powerful people are secretly reacting to a predictable cosmic event is in a strange way more comforting than the alternative that the world is inherently chaotic and that our fortunes are subject to forces no one truly understands or controls. The comet provides a narrative. It offers up a villain, the conspiring elite, and a clear ticking clock in the form of its perihelion. It transforms a vague sense of unease into a concrete solvable mystery. And so we find ourselves at a remarkable crossroads. An ancient celestial wanderer, a product of the pristine physical laws of the universe, is on a collision course with the modern world of high-speed information, algorithmic trading, and deeply polarized belief systems. The stage is set. We have the object of our fascination 3I, Atlas, a silent messenger from an unknown star. We have the central mystery, the inexplicable large-scale financial maneuvers of the planet's most powerful individuals' transactions that seem to march in eerie lockstep with the comet's approach. And we have the theory, a narrative of cosmic foreknowledge and elite conspiracy that has now escaped the digital fringe and is beginning to cast a long shadow over the mainstream. The question we must now confront is no longer whether this theory exists, but whether it is possible even remotely that it contains a grain of truth. We must peel back the layers of rumor and speculation and venture into the worlds of both the billionaires and the astronomers. We must scrutinize the evidence, talk to the experts, and weigh the probability of a grand conspiracy against the seductive power of a grand coincidence. Is this simply the latest, most sophisticated version of humanity's age-old habit of seeing our own dramas written in the stars? Or have we stumbled upon the quiet prelude to a global paradigm shift, a secret held by a select few, telegraphed not in press releases, but in the cold, hard data of the stock market? The answers lie ahead, hidden in the glare of the sun and the encrypted ledgers of global finance. And so we must confront the ghost in the machine. We must turn away from the unsettling glow in our telescopes and for a moment silence the whispers of impending doom. The fear, the speculation, the gut-wrenching feeling that those at the apex of our world know something we do not. These are powerful, seductive forces, but they are not evidence. To find that we must descend into a different kind of darkness, a cosmos not of stars and dust, but of numbers and transactions. We must enter the digital bloodstream of the global economy, a place of cold, hard, unforgiving data. For if there is a conspiracy, if there is a coordinated flight of capital spurred on by the approach of 3I, Atlas, its signature must be here etched into the ledgers of the world's financial markets. The question is no longer what we fear, but what the data actually says. Is this a genuine, unprecedented exodus, a silent fire alarm being pulled in the boardrooms of the elite? Or are we the public merely staring at the sun's reflection in a puddle, mistaking a mundane ripple for a world-ending tidal wave? To begin this journey, we must first arm ourselves with a healthy dose of skepticism and listen to the voices of reason, the experts who spend their lives charting these very currents. Their world is not one of cometary omens, but of quarterly reports and interest rate hikes. When they look at the recent massive sell-offs by prominent billionaires, they don't see an astronomical trigger. They see a storm that has been brewing for years, a storm entirely of our own making. They point first and foremost to the most powerful invisible force in modern economics, the relentless upward march of interest rates. For over a decade, we lived in a fantasy world of near-zero-cost money. Capital was cheap, almost free, a boundless ocean for entrepreneurs and investors to sail upon. This environment acted like a greenhouse for growth stocks, particularly in the tech sector, where the promise of future profits outweighed the reality of current earnings. Billionaires were minted as valuations soared into the stratosphere, untethered from the gravitational pull of traditional financial metrics. But that era is over. Central banks, in a desperate battle against runaway inflation, have been systematically draining that ocean of cheap money. They have introduced a new gravity into the system. Each basis point increase in the interest rate acts like a cosmic anchor, dragging those high-flying valuations back down to a much harsher earth. The money that was once free now has a cost, a steep one. And in this new, unforgiving environment, holding on to hyperinflated growth stocks is no longer a winning strategy. It's a gamble against the house, and the house has decided to change the rules of the game. The experts argue that what we are witnessing is not a panicked flight from a celestial threat, but a perfectly rational, if painful, portfolio rebalancing. It's a great migration of capital moving away from the treacherous peaks of speculative growth and into the safer, sheltered valleys of bonds and high-yield savings accounts, places where money can weather the storm and earn a predictable return. Selling billions in stock isn't an act of panic. In this context, it's an act of prudence. It's the logical conclusion of a monetary policy shift so monumental that it's forcing a complete re-evaluation of what an asset is truly worth. The comet from this perspective is merely a coincidence, a dramatic celestial backdrop for an entirely terrestrial and predictable economic drama. Then there is the second horseman of this conventional explanation, geopolitical instability, a factor shaking the very foundations of our interconnected world. For decades, globalization was the engine of prosperity. Supply chains stretched across the planet like a finely woven tapestry, and markets operated under the assumption of a relatively stable, predictable world order. That assumption now lies in tatters. We see new conflicts erupting with terrifying regularity, disrupting the flow of energy, food, and essential goods. We see a new era of protectionism, of trade wars and economic blockades, as nations retreat into themselves, viewing global interdependence not as a strength, but as a critical vulnerability. This instability creates a fog of uncertainty that investors, particularly those with billions at stake, despise more than anything else. An analyst for a major investment bank, speaking on condition of anonymity, put it bluntly. "Capital is a coward," she said. "It flees from uncertainty." Why would you keep your fortune tied up in multinational corporations when you have no idea if their factories will be nationalized, their shipping lanes disrupted, or their target markets closed off by sanctions next year? Wouldn't. You would convert it to something more tangible, more controllable. Cash, gold, real estate in a stable country. You de-risk. This is not about a comet 300 million miles away. It's about a conflict 3,000 miles away that could cripple the world's energy supply overnight. It's about a trade dispute that could sever the supply of microchips to the entire globe. The billionaire class, with their vast networks of information and global perspective, are simply the first to react to these seismic shocks. They are the canaries in the geopolitical coal mine, and their selling is a signal that they believe the ground beneath our feet is becoming increasingly unstable. They aren't preparing for a rock from space. They are battening down the hatches for a man-made hurricane they see gathering on the horizon. The timing again seems to be a cruel twist of fate, with the comet's approach perfectly mirroring a period of rising global tension, allowing one to be easily mistaken for the cause of the other. But even if we discount the global macro environment, financial data scientists point to another simpler explanation, one that lies within the natural, cyclical rhythm of the market itself. The last decade, particularly in the technology and so-called disruptor sectors, has been one of the most ferocious bull markets in human history. Valuations became detached from reality, fueled by speculative fervor and a narrative of endless growth. Companies with no profits, and sometimes no viable business model, were awarded market capitalizations larger than the entire economies of small nations. This, the analysts tell us, is the very definition of a bubble. And bubbles throughout all of financial history have one thing in common: they always pop. What we are seeing might simply be the smartest people in the room deciding that the party is over. The founders and early investors who rode these companies to unimaginable wealth are now looking at the dizzying heights of their stock prices and making a simple calculation. They are diversifying. They are taking some of their winnings off the table. It's a move any sensible financial advisor would recommend. To hold on to all of that stock concentrated in a single volatile asset would be the height of irresponsibility. So they sell. They establish foundations. They buy sports teams. They invest in real estate. They move their wealth from a single precarious point of failure into a broad, stable base. This process isn't new. It has happened at the peak of every market cycle in history. The dot-com bust of the early 2000s was preceded by a wave of insider selling. The housing market crash of 2008 saw executives quietly cashing out before the fall. The pattern is always the same. Those closest to the asset are the first to recognize when it has become dangerously overvalued. Their selling isn't a sign of some esoteric hidden knowledge about the cosmos. It's a sign of their intimate expert knowledge of their own balance sheets and their own industries. They are not astronomers. They are astute business people who recognize a market top when they see one. The comet's dramatic appearance is, in this light, a spectacular red herring, a cosmic scapegoat for a classic cyclical and entirely predictable market correction. The narrative of a secret cabal preparing for an impact event is infinitely more exciting than the boring truth of prudent portfolio diversification. But that the experts conclude with an air of certainty is precisely what we are seeing. A perfect storm of rational financial decisions misinterpreted by a public primed for panic, all happening under the watchful eye of a completely unrelated celestial visitor. The case, it would seem, is closed. And yet, it isn't. Because when you push past these powerful, logical, and deeply reassuring explanations, when you stare into the abyss of the raw data, for long enough, subtle patterns begin to emerge. Anomalies, discrepancies that don't quite fit the neat and tidy narrative of market cycles and interest rates. It's in these murky depths, these statistical shadows, that the easy answers begin to fray. The first crack in the dam of certainty is the sheer breathtaking scale of the liquidation. Yes, insiders always sell at market tops, but not like this. Data scientists who model market behavior are flagging the current volume of insider sales as a Six Sigma event, a statistical term for something so far outside the norm that it should happen only once every million years. The amount of wealth being moved, the sheer velocity of the transactions dwarfs previous market peaks. It's one thing for executives to trim their positions. It is another thing entirely for founders to liquidate not 10, not 20, but in some cases over 90% of their foundational holdings in the companies they built, the very source of their power and identity, all within the same narrow window of time. This isn't just taking chips off the table. This feels like an evacuation, a coordinated, almost synchronized exodus that seems to go beyond simple market timing. It's the synchronization that is most troubling. Normally, insider selling is a messy, chaotic affair spread out over months or even years. Different executives have different needs, different tax considerations, different levels of risk tolerance. But what we're seeing now is different. Complex algorithms designed to detect hidden patterns in market data are flagging a strange coherence to these sales. They are not random. They are clustered in time, often occurring within days or even hours of each other across completely unrelated industries. A tech billionaire in California sells a massive block of shares on a Monday. A European industrialist does the same on Tuesday. A South American mining magnate follows suit on Thursday. Individually, each sale can be explained away. But taken together, they begin to look less like a crowd of people individually deciding to leave a party, and more like a silent, choreographed fire drill. It's a pattern that suggests a shared catalyst, a single piece of information, or a common conviction that has rippled through this elite, insulated community. The conventional models of market behavior, which assume rational but independent actors, begin to break down in the face of this statistical ghost. They can explain each individual sale, but they struggle to explain the chilling harmony of the whole. And then there is the final, most unsettling piece of the puzzle where the money is going. This is not a simple rotation from growth stocks into value stocks, or from equities into bonds. That would be the classic predictable playbook for a market downturn, but a significant and growing percentage of this capital is not being reinvested in public markets at all. It is vanishing from the grid, it's flowing into highly illiquid, intensely private, and unusually defensive assets. We are talking about vast tracts of remote agricultural land in places like New Zealand and Patagonia. We are talking about private bunkers, hardened underground facilities built by a new class of survival tech companies outfitted with independent sources of power, water, and air filtration. We are seeing unprecedented investment in private seed vaults in advanced hydroponics and aquaculture companies in technologies focused on long-term off-grid self-sufficiency. Money is pouring into private security firms, not the ones that protect corporate offices, but elite mercenary groups and companies that specialize in executive extraction and relocation. This is not the behavior of people who are simply worried about a stock market correction. A correction is a financial event. You hedge against it with gold, with bonds, with cash. You don't hedge against a dip in the Nasdaq by buying a geothermal-powered farm in Iceland. This is the behavior of people who are preparing for a fundamental breakdown in the systems that underpin civilization itself. They are converting their abstract digital wealth, their stock tickers, and their bank balances into tangible physical assets: food, water, shelter, security. Things that will have value when the supply chains are severed, when the grids go down, when the complex, fragile web of global trade collapses. The financial experts and economists, with their elegant models and rational explanations, are left speechless by this. Their theories can explain the Times selling asterisk. They can explain the Times why now asterisk. But they cannot account for this. They cannot explain this desperate primal flight towards tangible survival. Their logic holds, but only up to a point, and it is at that point where the data deviates from the expected path that the core of the mystery truly reveals itself. We are left with two competing realities: a world of financial reason where every action has a logical terrestrial explanation, and a world of statistical anomalies, a shadow economy moving in ways we don't understand, driven by a fear we cannot yet name. The discrepancy is now clear. The experts have given us a plausible alibi, but the evidence at the scene doesn't entirely match, and as 3i Atlas continues its silent, inexorable journey towards the sun, we are forced to ask a new, more terrifying question. What if both are true? What if the market really is on the verge of a cyclical correction, and the world's most powerful people are using that event as cover for something else entirely? So the pieces lie before us, scattered and seemingly disconnected. In one corner, a silent, icy wanderer named 3i Atlas, an object of sublime cosmic indifference, dutifully obeying the laws of gravity on its long plunge toward the Sunday. In the other, a series of stunningly synchronized financial maneuvers executed by the very titans of the global economy, the architects of the world you and I inhabit. The question that has echoed through our journey so far, the one that defies all conventional logic, is how a thread was ever woven between them. How did an ancient rock billions of miles away become the whispered justification for the movement of trillions of dollars? The answer, you see, has almost nothing to do with astronomy, and everything to do with the architecture of the modern mind. It's a story not of celestial mechanics, but of narrative contagion, of how an idea once born can achieve a life of its own, growing and mutating within the hidden currents of our digital world. To find the origin, we must journey back not to the outer solar system, but to the deep forgotten archives of an obscure online forum, a place dedicated to fringe economic theories. Here, amidst a chaotic tapestry of arcane charts and impassioned manifestos, a single anonymous post appeared. It wasn't a proclamation. It wasn't a warning. It was merely a question, a quiet observation posed with deceptive simplicity. The author, hidden behind a cryptic username, had simply juxtaposed two pieces of publicly available data. On one side of the screen, they presented the orbital plot of 3i, Atlas its trajectory, a clean, predictable parabola aiming for perihelion. On the other, a graph tracking the recent liquidation of assets by a handful of prominent tech and finance billionaires. There was no explicit claim, no accusation of conspiracy. The post ended with just a dozen words. "Funny coincidence, isn't it? What do they know that we don't?" That was it. That was the spark. In a world saturated with loud declarative statements, the power of this query lay in its ambiguity. It didn't give you an answer. It invited you to find your own. It was a seed of doubt planted not in fact but in feeling, a feeling of unease, of being on the outside of some great secret knowledge. For days the post languished, receiving only a few cursory replies. It was just one more piece of digital flotsam in an infinite ocean of data, but the seed had found fertile ground. The first ecosystem to truly nurture this nascent idea wasn't one of mainstream discourse, but a constellation of niche online communities, digital campfires, where distrust of established institutions was the binding ethos. These were the forums of doomsday preppers, the chat rooms of disillusioned amateur investors, the message boards frequented by those who believe history is secretly governed by unseen hands. For these groups, the world is a treacherous place, a stage for a play whose script is kept hidden from the audience. They were already primed for a narrative like this. The idea of 3i Atlas wasn't a sudden shock. It was the missing piece of a puzzle they had been assembling their entire lives. It confirmed their deepest held bias that the elite operate on a different plane of information. Within these cloistered communities, the idea began to evolve. The initial innocent question was stripped away, replaced by the hardened certainty of a conclusion. The coincidence became a correlation. The correlation hardened into causation. Anonymous users began to elaborate, adding layers of pseudo-scientific jargon. They spoke of potential gravitational disruptions from the comet's passage of electromagnetic pulses of exotic matter in its tail. None of it was grounded in verifiable physics, of course. It didn't need to be. The goal wasn't scientific accuracy. It was narrative coherence. They were building a story, and a good story is always more seductive than a complex reality. Each new post, each shared article, each amateur analysis acted as a reinforcing beam, strengthening the structure of this new belief. They created intricate infographics timelines linking stock trades to celestial events and complex diagrams that lent a veneer of scientific legitimacy. This was the incubation period where the theory developed its antibodies, learning to defend itself against skepticism with a fortress of curated data points and a pre-packaged set of counter-arguments against any official debunking. It was becoming a self-contained logic loop, a perfect circle of reasoning that was impenetrable from the outside. Anyone who questioned it was simply part of the cover-up. Anyone who dismissed it was a fool, a sheep unable to see the truth. The belief provided its adherents with a powerful sense of intellectual superiority, the intoxicating feeling of being among the few who are truly awake. But a belief, no matter how potent, remains contained if it cannot find a vector to cross into the wider population. This idea found its vectors not in one person, but in a new archetype of modern media, the digital prophet, the influencer turned oracle. These weren't journalists or scientists bound by professional ethics. They were charismatic broadcasters, masters of a new kind of intimate parasocial media. Consider the podcast host, a former Wall Street trader with a gravelly voice and a cultivated air of weary cynicism. He didn't present the 3i Atlas theory as fact. He presented it as a fascinating thought experiment. He would lean into his microphone, his voice a conspiratorial whisper, and say, "Look, I'm not telling you this is what's happening. I'm just asking the questions the mainstream media is too afraid to ask." This performance of objectivity was a shield. It allowed him to inject the most outlandish ideas into the discourse while maintaining plausible deniability. He was just exploring possibilities, connecting dots, thinking freely. His audience, already predisposed to trust him over established news sources, didn't hear a question. They heard a thinly veiled confirmation from a perceived insider. Then there was the video creator, a young, energetic firebrand, whose platform was built on a foundation of anti-establishment outrage. His videos were masterpieces of emotional manipulation, using rapid-fire editing, ominous music, and carefully selected news clips taken out of context to build a sense of escalating panic. He didn't delve into the supposed science of the comet. He focused on the moral dimension. The narrative he spun was one of cosmic injustice. While you worry about your grocery bills, the global elite are preparing their golden lifeboats because they have been warned of a cataclysm that they will not share with you. He wasn't selling a theory, he was selling a villain. He was channeling the very real economic anxieties of his millions of followers, taking their diffuse fears about inflation, job security, and an uncertain future, and giving them a single tangible focus, a comet and the cabal who knew it was coming. By doing so, he transformed a fringe idea into a populist crusade. These influencers were the superspreaders. They took the complex jargon-filled theory incubated in the forums and repackaged it into easily digestible, emotionally resonant content. They were brilliant translators, turning abstract speculation into compelling human drama. And for every view, for every click, for every share, they were rewarded. Not just with influence, but with direct financial gain, as fear, it turns out, is an incredibly profitable commodity in the attention economy. The more frightening the scenario, the higher the engagement. The higher the engagement, the greater the ad revenue. There was a powerful unseen incentive not to question, not to debunk, but to amplify. And it is here we must confront the most powerful and perhaps most terrifying character in this entire story. A character with no face, no voice, and no conscious intent. We're talking about the algorithm. The vast, invisible architecture of code that governs what you see, what you read, and what you are exposed to every single day. You must understand the recommendation engines on these massive platforms are not designed to discern truth from fiction. They are not arbiters of reality. They have one and only one prime directive to keep you watching, to maximize your engagement, to hold your attention for as long as possible. And the architects of these systems have discovered a fundamental truth about human psychology. Nothing holds our attention quite like fear, outrage, and a sense of hidden revelation. When a user watched one video about the 3I Atlas theory, the algorithm didn't see a person exploring a speculative idea. It saw a data point, a signal. The user engaged with content type X. The directive was simple: provide more content type X, and so the gentle current became a torrent. Your feed, once a diverse stream of information, would begin to narrow, to constrict. The next suggested video would be a little more extreme, the next recommended article a little more conspiratorial. You are pushed step by imperceptible step down a rabbit hole you didn't even know you were approaching. This is the insidious magic of the algorithmic echo chamber. It doesn't feel like propaganda. It feels like discovery. You feel as though you are the one conducting the research, that you are the one uncovering this hidden truth. But in reality, you are walking down a hallway where all the doors have been pre-selected for you, each one leading you deeper into the same room. The system actively seeks out and promotes the most inflammatory content because that is what is most effective at keeping our eyes glued to the screen. It acts as a vast planetary-scale sorting mechanism, finding those who are most susceptible to a particular narrative and feeding them an ever more intense diet of it. The algorithm became the theory's engine room, its global distribution network working 24 hours a day to connect this new belief with every mind it calculated would be receptive. It created a powerful feedback loop. The more the influencers created content, the more the algorithm promoted it. The more the algorithm promoted it, the larger the audience became. The larger the audience, the greater the incentive for the influencers to create even more extreme content. The idea was no longer just spreading. It was accelerating, achieving a kind of narrative escape velocity powered by the very platforms that connect our modern world. Eventually, inevitably, the sheer volume of this digital chatter grew too loud to be ignored. It began to breach the walls of its own echo chamber. It started with a trickle. A technology journalist writes a bemused article not about the comet, but about the bizarre online theory concerning the comet. The piece is framed as a curiosity, a quirky look at a strange subculture. But the act of reporting on the theory, even to dismiss it, gives it a new and powerful form of legitimacy. It introduces the idea to a far broader audience, an audience that would never have encountered it on fringe forums or video channels. The name 3I, Atlas, begins to appear in mainstream headlines. The conversation spills over from the digital world into the physical one. It becomes a topic of conversation at dinner parties, a confused question asked by your uncle at a family gathering. Did you hear about this comet thing? Financial news networks, seeing the online traffic, feel compelled to address it. They bring on a serious-looking astronomer to patiently explain that a comet of this size poses absolutely no physical threat to the Earth. They bring on a market analyst to calmly state that the billionaire stock sales are easily explained by market cycles, tax strategies, and portfolio diversification. But for those already caught in the theory's gravitational pull, these debunkings are not evidence of the theory's falsehood. They are proof of its truth. The denials are seen as part of the cover-up. The calm, rational explanations are dismissed as the predictable lies of the very establishment they were conditioned to distrust. This is the final tragic irony. The narrative has become so powerful, so self-sustaining, that it can absorb any attempt to dismantle it and use it as fuel. Every counter-argument becomes another brick in its fortress wall, and so the transition is complete. What began as a single speculative question in a dark corner of the internet has morphed into a widespread cultural phenomenon, a self-perpetuating engine of belief that is now powerful enough to influence real-world behavior and warp our shared sense of reality. It has become a ghost in the machine of our global consciousness, a story that many now believe to be more real than the silent, indifferent truth of the comet itself. The question now is what happens when a belief of this magnitude, built on such an unstable foundation, collides with the unyielding reality of the perihelion itself? What happens when the prophecy meets the physics, and so the signal escaped, the laboratory of the internet? What had been a fringe theory, a fascinating pattern whispered in the digital dark, began to bleed through the screen, seeping into the lived reality of millions. It no longer mattered if the correlation between the stock sales and the comet's journey was real. The times belief times in that correlation was now a force of nature in itself, a gravitational ghost beginning to warp the fabric of our economic world. The downward path wasn't plotted in the stars, but in our own minds. It started quietly, not in the gleaming towers of high finance, but at kitchen tables and in online forums where ordinary people were trying to secure a small piece of the future for themselves. For the small investor, the retail trader who had poured their hopes and savings into the market, this story was more than just a curiosity. It was a terrifying premonition. Imagine yourself in their position. You've read the articles, seen the viral videos, piecing it all together. You see charts laying the inbound trajectory of 3i Atlas over the unprecedented liquidation of assets by the very titans of industry who you've been told always know something the rest of us don't. They are the insiders, the ones with access to the real data, the ones who play the game on a level you can only dream of, and they are all quietly, methodically heading for the exits. The story provides an elegant, simple, and cosmically profound reason why. It's not about inflation, not about supply chains, not about geopolitical instability. It's about a celestial visitor on a collision course with our sun. How can a traditional financial advisor compete with an omen written in the sky? The fear of being left behind, of holding on while the smart money gets out, becomes a gnawing physical presence. It's a primal human instinct, the fear of being the last one to see the shadow of the hawk in the sky. This is where the insidious mechanics of confirmation bias began their work on a global scale. Once the seed of the comet theory was planted, everything became evidence. Every headline, every market fluctuation, every cryptic tweet from a tech mogul was no longer random noise, but another piece of the grand, terrifying puzzle falling into place. A 5% dip in the tech sector. That's not a market correction. It's the beginning of the comet crash. Another billionaire announces they're selling a fraction of their holdings for philanthropic reasons. That's just cover for their escape plan. The human brain craves narrative. It abhors chaos, and the 3i Atlas theory provided the most compelling story imaginable. It transformed the bewildering complexity of global economics into a simple, linear drama of foreknowledge and escape-casting billionaires as the prescient heroes of their own survival story and everyone else as the unsuspecting populace. This digital campfire tale once shared grew with every retelling. It was a perfect storm of modern phenomena, the public's deep-seated distrust of institutions, our growing reliance on crowdsourced truth, and the viral efficiency of social media algorithms designed to promote the most emotionally engaging content. And nothing is more engaging than a secret that promises to save you from impending doom. Small investors united by this shared narrative began to act. A trickle of sell orders became a stream, then a river. They weren't crashing the market, not yet. They were simply reacting to what they perceived as an undeniable truth, a warning from their digital prophets. They were trying to protect themselves, to follow the people who seemed to have a map of the treacherous road ahead. But in a system as interconnected and reflexive as our global market, millions of people trying to escape a phantom danger can create a very real one. They were in effect building the very trap they were trying to avoid. The aggregate of these individual decisions, each one logical from a certain point of view, began to alter the very climate of the market. We speak of market sentiment as if it's a dry academic metric, a number on a chart, but it is not. It is the collective mood of humanity, a psychic weather system driven by our hopes and more potently our fears. And for months that system was seeded with the story of 3I, Atlas. Professional analysts and institutional traders who would have once dismissed such a notion as absurd could no longer ignore its effects. They might not believe in the comet, but they had to believe in the power of the Times crowd times that did. Their sophisticated models, their algorithms built on decades of economic theory, had to start pricing in a new irrational variable, a cosmic ghost haunting the machine. High-frequency trading systems designed to react to shifts in sentiment in microseconds began to register this growing wave of fear. They didn't know its source was a ball of ice and rock millions of miles away. They just saw the sell-side pressure mounting, the fear index ticking up, and they responded as programmed, amplifying the trend, turning a human whisper into a digital roar. This is the terrifying paradox of a self-fulfilling prophecy. The belief itself becomes the active ingredient. The prophecy doesn't predict the future. It creates it. The chain reaction is as elegant as it is devastating. First, the story of the comet and the billionaires spreads, creating fear. Second, that fear drives people to sell their assets to avoid a predicted crash. Third, this mass selling creates downward pressure on the market, causing prices to actually fall. Fourth, the falling prices are then held up as definitive proof that the original story was true all along. Look, the crash is happening just as we were told. This apparent validation then triggers a new, more intense wave of panic selling from those who were previously skeptical. The cycle feeds on itself, a vicious feedback loop spiraling downward, fueled by its own momentum. The market wasn't reacting to the perihelion of 3I, Atlas. It was reacting to the times idea times of 3I, Atlas. A fiction, if believed by enough people, can exert a real-world force as powerful as gravity. It was a phantom steering the ship of the global economy, and it was steering it directly toward the rocks. But the consequences didn't remain confined to the financial pages. This grand narrative, so potent and alluring, was far too useful to be ignored by the political arena. It quickly became a weapon, a convenient explanation for complex problems, and a powerful tool for shaping public opinion. For incumbent governments struggling with economic headwinds, the comet crash narrative was a gift. Why was inflation rising? It wasn't fiscal policy. It was pre-perihelion market jitters. Why was unemployment ticking up? Businesses were bracing for the cosmic downturn. It became a universal scapegoat, a celestial black swan that absolved decision-makers of responsibility. It allowed them to point to the sky and say, "This is beyond our control." For their opponents, the story was equally valuable, but as a cudgel, they could frame the looming crash as a failure of leadership, an indictment of an administration asleep at the wheel while a predictable disaster approached. They ignored the warnings. The attack ads might say the image of a falling stock chart dissolving into a graphic of the approaching comet. The discourse became dangerously polarized. You either believed in the connection and were therefore enlightened and prepared, or you were a fool, a shill for the establishment deliberately closing your eyes to the truth. Trust in traditional sources of information, already fragile, began to crumble at an accelerated rate. Economists, financial journalists, and government agencies who tried to debunk the theory were dismissed as part of the conspiracy, their rational analysis drowned out by the emotional certainty of the crowd. Why would you trust a statement from the Federal Reserve when you had a leaked document from a supposed astrophysicist confirming your deepest fears. This erosion of shared reality is perhaps the most lasting and corrosive legacy of the presser whole affair. When a society can no longer agree on a common set of facts, when a cosmic narrative becomes more believable than economic data, the very foundations of civil discourse and democratic governance begin to crack. The comet wasn't just threatening the stock market, it was threatening the operating system of our society. And here, in the depths of the chaos, as the world watched the skies with a mixture of fear and fascination, we must ask the most critical question of all. What if we were all looking in the wrong direction? The human mind is easily captivated by a spectacular story, by a single dramatic threat. It is a survival trait, a way to focus our attention and energy. But it is also a profound vulnerability. A magician uses this principle to perform the impossible, focusing your attention on the dazzling flourish of their right hand, while their left hand quietly performs the trick. We were all staring transfixed at the right hand, a magnificent glittering comet named 3I, Atlas. But what was the left hand doing? What if this entire all-consuming narrative was not the cause of the economic turmoil, but merely a distraction from it, a convenient and spectacular cosmic smokescreen designed to hide a much more mundane yet far more significant truth? While the world was consumed by kitchen table cosmology, the real underlying vulnerabilities of the global economy were not only being ignored, they were festering. There were fault lines deep within the system, genuine reasons for those at the top to be quietly de-risking their portfolios, reasons that had nothing to do with celestial mechanics. Think of the staggering levels of sovereign and corporate debt, a ticking time bomb that had been accumulating for over a decade. Consider the profound fragility of our just-in-time global supply chains, a complex web so tightly wound that a single break could cause cascading failures. Remember the persistent creeping inflation that central banks were struggling to contain, a slow poison, eroding the value of assets and the purchasing power of billions. These were the real spectres haunting the market. These were the tectonic stresses building up beneath the surface. They were complex, difficult to explain, and offered no single party to blame. They were problems without a simple story. Compared to these messy, intractable issues, the comet was perfect. It was clean. It was external. It was a story with a clear beginning, a terrifying middle, and a definitive end, the perihelion. It gave us a single, identifiable villain. For the billionaires who were selling, could there have been a more opportune narrative? Their sell-off, which might otherwise have been seen as a vote of no confidence in the economy they themselves helped build, was instead recontextualized. They weren't abandoning a sinking ship of their own making. They were prudently reacting to an act of God. The comet narrative provided them with the perfect cover. It created a panic that both masked their true motivations and perversely may have even accelerated the market downturn, allowing them to potentially buy back in at the bottom, their wealth and power magnified. It turned a strategic, calculated exit based on insider knowledge of systemic rot into a heroic act of foresight in the face of an unavoidable cosmic event. The panic in the streets served to obscure the quiet, methodical strategy sessions in the boardroom. We were caught in a collective delusion, arguing over the meaning of a shadow on the wall, while the foundations of the cave were trembling. The psychological and societal impact was immense, a testament to our enduring need for myth and our vulnerability to compelling fictions in an age of information overload. We saw how a belief utterly divorced from fact could generate tangible, world-altering consequences, creating a feedback loop of fear that nearly spiraled out of control. It revealed the terrifying power of narrative itself as a market force, as a political tool, and as a social contagion. The downward path was real. The losses were real. The fear was real. But the cause we had all been obsessing over, the celestial spectre of 3I, Atlas, may have been nothing more than a magnificent piece of misdirection. This realization forces us to confront a much more disturbing possibility. The story didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was amplified. It was shaped. Certain voices, certain nodes in the global information network pushed it harder than others. The fear wasn't entirely organic. It seems to have been cultivated. The question is no longer just times how times this belief took hold of us, but times who times benefited from it taking hold. Was this all just a spontaneous collective hysteria, a bizarre but ultimately accidental confluence of a comet, a volatile market, and the anxieties of our time? Or was it something more deliberate? Was the narrative of 3i Atlas simply a story we told ourselves? Or was it a story that was told, to times us carefully and with a specific hidden purpose in mind? To find that answer, we must trace the story back to its source, following the digital breadcrumbs into the very heart of the network where this reality-bending idea was born. And so we arrive here at the precipice. After months of whispers amplified into global headlines, after watching the silent exodus of capital from the highest towers of finance, we stand on the threshold of the appointed day. The world you woke up in this morning feels different. It's a planet holding its breath. In the sterile, blue-lit halls of data centers from New York to Tokyo, algorithms that govern trillions of dollars hum with a new anxious intensity. Their logic has been twisted by a variable they were never programmed to comprehend, a 4-kilometer-wide ball of ice and rock, a transient messenger from the outer darkness. The human traders, their supposed masters, are no better, their faces illuminated by the green and red glow of pre-market tickers, nursing coffees, and a profound sense of dread. They are waiting for a signal not from a central bank or a geopolitical development, but from the heavens themselves. Across the globe, another kind of vigil is being kept. In the high, arid deserts of Chile and atop the volcanic peaks of Hawaii, observatory domes have swiveled like the heads of ancient cyclopean gods. They are all locked onto a single faint smudge of light, a cosmic traveler, now making the most dangerous passage of its multi-millennial journey. This is the moment of perihelion, the climax of a gravitational saga written in the birth of the solar system. For astronomers, it is a chance to witness the raw, elemental power of a star peeling back the layers of a pristine celestial fossil, analyzing the vaporizing breath of creation itself. But for the rest of us, for the markets, for the culture that has woven this comet into a modern myth of foresight and ruin, it is something else entirely. It is a verdict. The question that has haunted us for nearly a year is about to be answered. Was the great sell-off, that unprecedented liquidation of wealth by the people who seemingly control the world, an act of prophecy? Did they have access to some terrible hidden knowledge, a secret channel that connected the fate of our civilization to the trajectory of this interstellar wanderer? Or was it all just the most expensive, most terrifying coincidence in human history? The clock ticks towards the opening bell. The comet 3i Atlas accelerates towards its closest, most violent embrace with the Sunday, and we suspended between the cold mechanics of the cosmos and the hot-blooded panic of human economics can do nothing but watch. The fuse, whether real or imagined, has reached the powder. The light from the comet even now is hours old. The event we are about to witness on our screens has already transpired, its fate sealed by the unforgiving laws of physics. We are merely catching up to reality. In the control rooms, astronomers are not watching a live feed, so much as they are reading a postcard from the past. A postcard written in fire. As 3i Atlas makes its hairpin turn around our star, it is subjected to a level of punishment that is almost impossible to comprehend. The sun, which from our comfortable distance is a life-giving warmth, becomes a celestial blowtorch at this proximity. Its radiation, a torrent of high-energy particles and photons, flash boils the ancient ices that have been in a deep freeze for eons. Water, ammonia, methane, carbon dioxide, the building blocks of worlds, erupt from its surface in colossal jets, creating a temporary glowing atmosphere we call the coma. This expanding cloud of gas and dust larger than the planet Jupiter is what our telescopes are seeing. They are seeing the comet bleed its very essence into the void. The solar wind, a constant supersonic gale flowing from the sun, catches this newly liberated material and sculpts it into the iconic tail, a shimmering ethereal banner of ionized gas and dust stretching for millions of kilometers across the solar system. It is a spectacle of exquisite destructive beauty, a gravitational dance where one partner is being slowly torn apart. But the astronomers are looking for something more specific. Any instability, any sign that the immense tidal forces and thermal shock are fracturing the comet's nucleus, A sudden dramatic brightening could signal that the icy conglomerate has cracked open, exposing fresh, highly volatile material to the solar furnace. A fragmentation event would be a scientific bonanza, but it would also be a visual cue, a piece of cosmic theatre that could be wildly misinterpreted by an already terrified global audience. The data streams in. Spectrographs analyze the chemical composition of the outgassing, searching for unexpected elements. Radar pings the nucleus, attempting to map its shape and rotation through the blinding glare. All is nominal. The comet is holding together. It is surviving its trial by fire, enduring the inferno as it has perhaps done countless times before in its lonely pilgrimage. It is a testament to resilience, a dirty snowball defying a star. It performs its celestial duty with an indifference that is both terrifying and sublime. It has no awareness of the stock market. It feels no pressure from our collective anxiety. It simply falls and burns and flies onward. And then on Earth the bell rings. That iconic clang, once a symbol of opportunity and commerce, now sounds like a starter pistol for a stampede. In the first few nanoseconds, high-frequency trading algorithms, executing orders at the speed of light, begin to probe the market. They are searching for the slightest tremor of fear, the first wave of the sell-off they have been programmed to expect. Billions of automated queries flood the exchanges, testing the liquidity, sniffing for weakness. But the expected avalanche of sell orders doesn't materialize. There is a pause, a digital intake of breath. The first minute of trading passes an eternity on Wall Street. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, the Nasdaq, the S&P 500, they flicker. A slight dip, perhaps 0.25% born of pure nervousness. But it is not the cataclysm. It is not the freefall that the new oracles of finance, the billionaires, had seemingly foretold with their actions. The second minute passes, then the fifth. On trading floors, the hushed, tense atmosphere begins to shift. A few confused murmurs ripple through the crowds. Heads turn from the glowing red tickers back to the news feeds, which show stunning silent images of the comet from the European Southern Observatory. The two realities, the cosmic and the economic, are playing out on parallel screens, and for the first time the phantom thread connecting them seems to be fraying. The expected cause is not producing the expected effect. 10 minutes in the initial dip has vanished. The market is flat. Then, impossibly, it ticks upward, a fraction of a green percentage point. It is a signal of defiance. A small group of institutional buyers, sensing the paralysis of fear, has decided to bet against the apocalypse. They start buying into the deeply discounted blue-chip stocks, the very ones liquidated months ago. It is a pivotal moment. The fear which fed on itself in the vacuum of information is now being starved of its fuel. The prophecy is failing to self-fulfill. The global nervous system of finance, which had been coiled like a spring, slowly begins to relax. By the end of the first hour, the market is not just stable, it is rallying. A relief rally, the pundits will call it. A collective global sigh of relief priced into equities. The great comet-driven crash of 3I, Atlas, is not happening. The date has passed. The celestial event unfolded with magnificent predictable physics. And our civilization, our intricate and fragile economic ecosystem did not collapse. The silence from the heavens was met not with a scream but with a shrug, and the steady, relentless hum of commerce resuming its normal course. The question then returns with even greater force. If the comet was not the reason, what was? As the day wears on and the markets close, not with a crash, but with a confident surge, the narrative begins its tectonic shift. The mystery of the billionaires' sell-off is no longer a tale of cosmic foresight. It is now a detective story, and the clues were never in the sky. They were hidden in plain sight, buried in financial reports, tax schedules, and the subtle cyclical rhythms of the global economy. The truth, as it begins to emerge, is far more mundane and perhaps far more revealing than any astrological prediction. We had been looking through a telescope when we should have been using a microscope. The first layer of this new reality is purely economic. For over a decade, fueled by historically low interest rates and unprecedented levels of quantitative easing from central banks, the world had been living through what many economists were quietly calling the everything bubble. stock valuations became detached from their underlying corporate earnings. Real estate prices soared to unsustainable heights. Cryptocurrencies and speculative tech ventures attracted capital with little more than a white paper and a dream. It was a party that had gone on for so long people forgot it could ever end. But the billionaires, the architects, and primary beneficiaries of this system they did not forget. They have access to a different kind of observatory. Not one that tracks comets, but one that monitors global capital flows, credit cycles, and the subtle shifts in consumer sentiment. They saw the writing on the wall. They could hear the music beginning to slow, with central banks signaling an end to the era of cheap money to combat rising inflation. They knew the tide that had lifted all boats was about to go out. The sell-off was not about predicting a specific sudden cataclysm. It was a prudent, calculated move to get off the beach before the tsunami that they themselves knew was forming far out at sea. It was a repositioning of assets, a strategic retreat to higher ground, converting dangerously inflated paper wealth into the hard certainty of cash, real estate, and other tangible assets. They were not betting on a comet hitting the Earth. They were betting on gravity eventually reasserting itself in the financial markets. The comet just happened to be a convenient, spectacular coincidence, a dramatic backdrop for a drama that was already well underway. The second piece of the puzzle is even less dramatic. It is, of all things, about taxes. Buried deep within proposed legislative changes were new regulations targeting capital gains for the highest income brackets. A window was closing. For individuals sitting on tens of billions of dollars in unrealized gains from stocks they had held for years, sometimes decades, there was a simple mathematical incentive to sell before the new tax laws took effect. To an outsider, a sale of $5 billion in stock looks like a terrifying vote of no confidence in the future. To the billionaire and their army of accountants, it was simple, rational tax planning on an epic scale. They were not fleeing a coming apocalypse. They were just getting ahead of the taxman. This single terrestrial driver likely accounted for a massive percentage of the sell-offs that so captured the public imagination. The timing so close to the comet's perihelion was once again a fluke of the legislative calendar, not the cosmic one. But it is the final piece of the puzzle that is perhaps the most profound, because it is about us. It is about you. It is about the fundamental human need to find patterns, to weave stories, to connect disparate events into a coherent, meaningful narrative. This psychological phenomenon has a name: apophenia. It is the tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated things. It is seeing faces in the clouds, hearing messages in random noise, and in this case, linking the scheduled financial planning of the ultra-rich to the orbital mechanics of a passing comet. The world had become an increasingly anxious and uncertain place. The everything bubble created a low-level hum of economic dread that everyone could feel even if they could not name it. There was a widespread sense that the system was fragile, that the good times were artificial and could not last. This free-floating anxiety was searching for a cause for an anchor, and along came 3i, Atlas. It was perfect. It was visual, grand, and mysterious. It had a specific deadline, a day of reckoning. It was a story as old as humanity itself, a sign in the heavens foretelling a change on Earth. The comet did not create the fear. The fear was already there, simmering beneath the surface. The comet merely gave it a name and a face. The billionaire's actions, driven by cold, hard financial logic, became the supposed confirmation. We saw the pattern we wanted to see, the one that made the most sense of our own anxieties. We built a myth because the reality that our economic system is a complex, cyclical, and often irrational beast is far more difficult to personify and far less satisfying to blame. So the day ends. The comet, now receding from the sun, continues on its journey back towards the cold, silent darkness of the Oort cloud, its brief, fiery moment in the spotlight complete. The markets, having stared into the abyss of their own making and finding nothing there, are buoyant. The great mystery has been solved. The decoded message from the billionaire class was not one of cosmic doom, but of prudent risk management and tax optimization. There was no secret knowledge, no prophetic vision. There was only balance sheets, calculators, and calendars. The ghost in the machine was never in the heavens. It was not a malevolent intelligence hiding in the code of the universe linking comets to market crashes. The ghost, it turns out, was inside us all along. It is our own profound need for meaning, our talent for storytelling, and our deep, abiding fear of the unknown. And as we now know, that can be a more powerful and more dangerous force than any comet. And so the celestial visitor departs. 3I, Atlas the ghost from the Oort cloud, now recedes into the black, its brief fiery reign in our imaginations over. It has rounded the sun and begun its impossibly long journey back to the frozen frontier of our solar system, leaving behind a wake not of cosmic dust but of questions. The fever has broken, the frantic headlines have faded, replaced by the next cycle of anxieties. The billionaire stock sales, once scrutinized as harbingers of a secret apocalypse, have been absorbed into the ceaseless, churning data stream of the global economy. We are left in the quiet aftermath, standing amidst the architecture of a grand and powerful delusion. What have we learned from this journey to the edge of reason? What remains when the phantom we chased dissolves in the light of day? We learn that the most powerful force in the universe, at least in our human sphere, is not gravity but narrative. We witnessed how a compelling story can develop its own gravitational pull, a kind of cognitive singularity that bends facts, contorts perceptions, and draws disparate events into a single, cohesive, and utterly fallacious orbit. This phenomenon, this narrative gravity, is a fundamental aspect of the human condition. Our brains are not built to passively observe reality. They are relentless pattern-matching engines. We are the descendants of ancestors who saw a predator in the rustling grass, who connected the turning of the seasons to the movement of the stars. This instinct for connection, for finding order in the chaos, is our greatest strength and our most profound vulnerability. And in the digital age, this instinct is supercharged. We were presented with two seemingly unrelated events: a group of enormously wealthy individuals divesting large portions of their stock, and the approach of a notable, if not unprecedented, comet. In isolation, each is explicable. The first is a matter of sophisticated, albeit often opaque, financial strategy. The second is a simple, beautiful display of orbital mechanics, a clockwork dance set in motion billions of years ago. But when placed in proximity within the echo chambers of our modern world, they ceased to be separate data points. They became the poles of a story, and our minds, hungry for meaning, rushed to draw the line between them. The process was seductive in its simplicity. Every new stock sale, every cryptic tweet, every ominous-sounding market report was no longer just noise. It became evidence. It was a breadcrumb on the trail, a clue validating the nascent theory. This is the insidious magic of confirmation bias, the mind's tendency to welcome information that supports our existing beliefs and reject that which contradicts them. The narrative acted as a filter, allowing only the right kind of information to pass through. We saw the billionaires not as executives executing pre-scheduled trading plans, but as panicked insiders fleeing a sinking ship. We saw the comet not as an inert ball of ice and rock, but as the agent of destruction, a celestial bullet with our name on it. The story felt true because it was emotionally resonant. It spoke to a deep and pervasive unease with the current state of the world, the feeling that the system is rigged, that the powerful possess a secret knowledge withheld from the rest of us, and that vast, uncontrollable forces are shaping our destiny. The comet narrative gave a face and a deadline to this free-floating anxiety. It was a myth for modern times, complete with its own pantheon of prescient oligarchs and a fiery, impartial judge descending from the heavens. It was an elegant, terrifying, and deeply human invention. Yet to truly understand the illusion, we must have the courage to dismantle it piece by piece, to step away from the poetry of the prophecy and into the prose of the balance sheet. The reality of those stock sales, as we have seen, was rooted not in cosmic foresight, but in the rigid logic of wealth management and corporate governance. We must remember the mundane architecture of the 10b-1 plan, the legal instrument that allows corporate insiders to sell a predetermined number of shares at a predetermined time. These are not impulsive decisions made while staring at an astronomer's report. They are strategies set in motion months, sometimes years in advance, designed to provide liquidity, diversify assets, and critically to avoid any accusation of insider trading. They are the epitome of financial planning, the very opposite of a panic-induced fire sale. We saw executives selling to cover the immense tax liabilities that come from vesting stock options, a routine part of their compensation packages. Money that exists only on paper must be converted to cash to pay the taxman a simple act of accounting that requires a massive sale of shares. This isn't prophecy, it's paperwork. We uncovered the immense philanthropic pledges, vast promises made to universities, hospitals, and foundations that must be funded. For individuals whose wealth is almost entirely tied up in the stock of the companies they founded, the only way to meet these 9 or 10-figure commitments is to liquidate a commensurate amount of their holdings. It is the predictable and necessary process of converting corporate power into civic influence. We also saw the simple, rational desire for diversification. No prudent investor, no matter how confident in their own enterprise, keeps all of their eggs in one basket. As their companies matured and their personal wealth reached astronomical levels, many of these figures were simply cashing out a fraction of their life's work to secure their family's future, investing in other sectors, real estate, or government bonds. It was a move any financial advisor would recommend, a sign of prudence, not of impending doom. And perhaps most significantly, these sales often occurred against a backdrop of historic market highs. To sell at the peak of a bull run is the oldest and most rational move in the investor's playbook. They were not selling because they believed the world was about to end. They were selling because by every conventional metric, it was an extraordinarily good time to sell. The disconnect is staggering. On one hand, we have a world of scheduled transactions, tax obligations, and portfolio rebalancing. It is a world governed by algorithms, shareholder agreements, and the Securities and Exchange Commission. It is complex, it is driven by self-interest, but it is fundamentally rational. On the other hand, we have a story of cosmic judgment, of a silent warning whispered among the elite, transmitted not through market data but through some secret channel of forbidden knowledge. The first is the truth, the second is the story we told ourselves. And we must ask why that story was so much more compelling, so much more magnetic than the truth. The answer, I believe, lies not in the stars but in ourselves. It lies in the profound human yearning to believe that the universe is meaningful, that its grand events are not random but are somehow connected to our own small lives. For millennia, we have looked to the heavens for guidance and for meaning. Comets in particular have always been potent symbols, celestial messengers freighted with significance. They were the omens that foretold the death of kings, the harbingers of war, plague, and famine. They tore a gash in the comforting celestial tapestry, a violation of the predictable order of the sun, moon, and stars. They were cosmic exceptions, and they demanded an exceptional explanation. Our modern world, for all its technological sophistication and scientific understanding, has not inoculated us against this ancient impulse. We may have demystified the cosmos, mapping the orbits of 1 million asteroids and calculating the chemical composition of distant stars, but we have not demystified our own existence. We live in an age of unprecedented complexity, subject to global economic forces that feel as remote and uncontrollable as the tides. We watch as wealth inequality grows to levels that seem to defy gravity, creating a class of individuals whose financial power is equivalent to that of nations. We feel a pervasive sense of precarity, a feeling that the systems upon which we depend are more fragile than we once believed. In such a world, the idea that a comet could wipe the slate clean, that it could act as a great impartial leveler, is a terrifying but also strangely comforting thought. It replaces the messy, incomprehensible chaos of human systems with the clean, beautiful, and absolute logic of astrophysics. It is a fantasy of reset, a desire for an external agent to intervene in a game that feels hopelessly rigged. The billionaires weren't just characters in this story, they were symbols of the system itself. Their imagined panic was our catharsis. Their secret knowledge confirmed our deepest suspicions that the deck is stacked, and that the only way to reshuffle it is through an act of God or an act of nature on a cosmic scale. This is the enduring power of myth. It provides a framework for our anxieties, a narrative container for our fears. The story of 3i, Atlas, was never truly about the comet, nor was it even about the billionaires. It was about us. It was a reflection of our collective state of mind, a projection of our hopes and fears onto the blank canvas of the night sky. And this leads us to the most crucial and unsettling question of all. While we were all looking up consumed by this celestial drama, what were we missing down here on Earth? What real substantive shifts in power and wealth were occurring in the shadows obscured by the brilliant light of this fictional narrative? A captivating story is also a powerful distraction. As our attention was fixated on the phantom menace of a comet, what quiet, methodical changes were being enacted? Was legislation being passed that subtly rewrote the rules of finance in favor of the very few? Were tectonic shifts in global paths? Supply chains cementing new monopolies while we were busy tracking orbital paths? Was the slow, grinding reality of inflation a far more tangible threat to the savings of ordinary people than any comet? Being downplayed and ignored, did the algorithmic trading that truly governs the market's minute-to-minute fluctuations continue its silent, invisible work of concentrating capital far from the public eye? The allure of a grand conspiracy is that it posits a secret hidden order, but the truth is often far more mundane and far more disturbing. It is not a secret cabal of billionaires staring into a telescope that shapes our world. It is the complex interlocking system of laws, regulations, and economic incentives, many of which are publicly known yet too complex or too boring to hold our attention. It is the slow, deliberate accumulation of advantage, the patient exploitation of loopholes, and the lobbying that molds policy over decades. These are the real forces that define our economic reality. They are not as cinematic as a comet, but their impact is infinitely more real and more lasting. The story of 3I Atlas is a cautionary tale. It reminds us that our search for meaning can be manipulated. It shows us that in a world saturated with information, the greatest challenge is not access, but discernment. The ability to distinguish between a signal and the noise, between a genuine threat and a captivating fantasy, has become the essential survival skill of our time. The universe does not send us messages. The planets do not align to warn us of a stock market crash. There are no patterns in the chaos save for those we impose upon it ourselves. The answers to our problems and the source of them are not out there in the cold, silent void. They are and always have been right here with us.